Let me tell you about the moment everything changed. Summer 1943. A German lieutenant stands in a Tennessee prison camp holding a bottle of Coca-Cola, something he's never seen before. It cost 5 cents, the same price, the guard tells him, that American kids pay at corner stores. He drinks it. The taste is cold, sweet, carbonated, impossible. Because here's what Nazi propaganda never prepared him for. His enemy wasn't weak. His enemy had so much abundance, so much ice cream, so much chocolate, so many soft drinks, that they served it to prisoners, not as propaganda, not as manipulation, but because in America, this was just normal. 371,683 German POWs learned this lesson that summer, one soda bottle and ice cream cone at a time. And some lessons, once tasted, can never be unlearned. The lieutenant's name was Klaus Weber, 26 years old, 3 years in uniform. He'd eaten boiled potatoes for breakfast more times than he could count. Black bread so hard it had to be soaked in ersatz coffee, the kind made from acorns and chicory because real coffee beans had vanished from Germany sometime in 1941. He'd watched friends divide a single chocolate bar into 8 pieces, savoring each sliver like communion. And now he stood in the July heat of Camp Crossville, Tennessee, watching American guards wheel out tubs of ice cream. Not one tub. Tubs, plural, vanilla, chocolate, strawberry. "Help yourselves," the guard said, handing out metal scoops. "We got plenty." Klaus stared. Around him, other prisoners stood frozen, uncertain whether this was a test or a trick. One of them, a corporal from Stuttgart, whispered in German, "They give this to prisoners." Before we continue, click that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It brings me great joy knowing that these war stories and lessons get to people all over the world. Your support helps us bring more thrilling war stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get back to the story. The guard, who apparently understood more German than he let on, laughed. "We give it to everyone, it's just ice cream." Just ice cream. Klaus took a scoop of vanilla. The cold hit his tongue first, genuine cold, the kind that came from real refrigeration, not cellars or snow. Then the cream, thick and rich. Then the sugar, pure and white and abundant, the way sugar used to taste before Germany started rationing it into memory. He'd forgotten food could taste like this. Around him, grown men, soldiers who'd stormed fortifications, who'd held lines under artillery fire, stood eating ice cream with tears in their eyes. Not from sadness, from something worse, understanding. Because if America could afford to serve ice cream to enemy prisoners in the middle of a war, on a random Thursday in July, just because it was hot outside, if they had so much that they could waste it on men who'd tried to kill them, then what else had the propaganda lied about? Klaus finished his ice cream in silence. The empty bowl felt heavier than his rifle ever had. That night, lying on a clean cot with actual sheets, he thought about the Coca-Cola, the ice cream, the chocolate bars stacked in the canteen like ammunition, 5 cents each, as casual as breathing. He thought about his younger brother back in Hamburg, who was probably eating turnip soup, and he realized Germany hadn't just lost the war. Germany had already lost before the war even started. They'd just been too hungry to see it. But let's rewind. Because Klaus's education in American abundance didn't start in Tennessee. It started 2 months earlier, in the desert. May 1943, Tunisia. The Afrika Korps had finally collapsed. Klaus remembered the surrender, not the moment itself, which had been chaos and dust and shouting, but the silence afterward. That terrible empty silence when you realize you're no longer a soldier, you're a prisoner, and everything you've been told about what happens to prisoners starts playing in your head on repeat. The SS officers had been very clear about Allied treatment of captives. Starvation, beatings, summary executions maybe. The Americans and British were Judenfreundlich, Jew-friendly, which meant they'd be especially brutal to German soldiers. So when the American trucks arrived at the processing camp outside Tunis, Klaus and 200 other men expected the worst. What they got was pancakes. Pancakes. Klaus thought he was hallucinating. 3 years in North Africa. 3 years of heat and flies and rations that consisted of hard biscuits, canned meat that tasted like rust, and that god-awful Ersatzkaffee had maybe broken something in his brain. Because the American soldiers were setting up field kitchens, and the smell drifting across the camp was syrup. Real syrup, sweet, warm. "Is this a trick?" Hans Mueller whispered beside him. Hans was a veteran, Africa Corps since '41. Are they fattening us up for something?" Klaus didn't answer. He couldn't. Because an American cook, a black man, which was its own shock, they'd been told America didn't let black men serve, was stacking pancakes onto metal trays. Actual pancakes, golden brown, steaming. "Line up!" an American sergeant shouted in broken German. "Breakfast! Everyone eats!" They lined up because they were still soldiers, even as prisoners. Discipline was all they had left. But Klaus watched the men ahead of him receive plate after plate, and nobody was being beaten, nobody was being turned away, and the pancakes kept coming. When Klaus reached the front, the cook plopped 4 pancakes onto his tray. 4, each one bigger than his hand. Then came scrambled eggs. Actual eggs, not the powdered kind, but eggs that had recently been inside chickens. Then a cup of coffee. Real coffee. The smell alone almost made Klaus weep. "Syrups on the table," the cook said in English, gesturing. Klaus carried his tray like it was made of glass. He sat. He poured syrup, real maple syrup, amber and thick, and cut into the stack with a fork that wasn't rusty. The first bite rewired something in his brain. It wasn't just that the food was good, it was that there was so much of it. The American cooks weren't rationing. They weren't measuring. They were just serving. Like feeding enemy soldiers was as routine as morning roll call. Hans was crying, openly crying, syrup on his chin. "They feed their prisoners better than our officers ate," he said quietly. Around them, 200 German soldiers were discovering the same impossible truth. They'd expected punishment and received breakfast. Klaus finished every bite. Then he stared at his empty plate and thought, "We never had a chance, did we?" The war hadn't been lost in the desert. It had been lost in America's wheat fields and sugar refineries and dairy farms. Lost before a single shot was fired, in a country that could afford to feed its enemies pancakes, just because it was morning and men needed to eat. That's when the fears started to shift into something more dangerous. Curiosity. The USS General M.B. Stewart left North Africa in late June 1943, carrying 3,000 German prisoners toward America. Klaus stood on deck during the first evening, watching the Mediterranean fade into darkness, and tried to prepare himself for what was coming. Prison camps in America. Hard labor, probably. Maybe mines. Maybe factories. The Geneva Convention guaranteed certain protections. But Klaus had stopped trusting guarantees somewhere around Tobruk. What he wasn't prepared for was the food. Again. Dinner the first night. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread with butter. Butter. Real butter. Yellow and soft. Not the gray margarine Germany had been passing off as food since 1940. "This is better than officer rations," Hans muttered, staring at his plate like it might vanish. "This is better than what we fed Rommel." But that wasn't even the strangest part. The strangest part came on July 4th. Klaus was below deck when the announcement crackled over the ship's intercom. First in English, then in heavily accented German. "Attention prisoners! Today is American Independence Day. Ice cream will be served on the main deck at 1400 hours. The Germans looked at each other. Did he say ice cream? Someone asked. On a ship? Another added. In the middle of the ocean? Hans laughed, the bitter kind. It's a mistranslation. Has to be. But at 1400 hours, Klaus climbed up to the main deck and saw the American sailors wheeling out a machine. Not a hand-crank freezer. An electric ice cream maker, stainless steel, humming with power from the ship's generators. They were making ice cream. In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. During a war. The line formed without orders. 3,000 prisoners, silent and stunned, watching American sailors scoop vanilla ice cream into paper cups. 10 gallons per batch, the machine churning out another load every 30 minutes. When Klaus reached the front, a sailor, couldn't have been older than 19, handed him a cup with a wooden spoon. "Happy 4th of July," the kid said, grinning. Klaus took the cup. The ice cream was already starting to melt in the summer heat, cream running down the sides. He ate it standing at the rail, staring at the horizon. It tasted exactly like the ice cream in Tunisia. Cold, sweet, impossible. Behind him, Hans was laughing, really laughing this time, not the bitter kind. "They have refrigeration on their ships," he said, wonder in his voice. "Not just for medicine or supplies, for ice cream. They built machines to make ice cream on ships." Another prisoner, a former engineer named Otto, was staring at the machine like it was alien technology. The power requirements alone. The refrigeration systems. "Do you understand what this means?" Klaus understood. It meant America had so much industrial capacity, so much electricity, so much steel, so much abundance, that they could afford to build ice cream makers into their transport ships. Not for morale, not for propaganda, just because they could. The ice cream melted faster than Klaus could eat it, vanilla dripping onto the deck. He watched it pool near his boots, wasted, casual, meaningless. In Germany, children were being taught to save bacon grease. In America, they were serving ice cream to prisoners on the ocean. Klaus threw his empty cup into the trash bin, a bin that would be emptied, the trash probably thrown overboard, more waste than his entire unit had produced in a month. "We're not fighting a country," Otto said quietly beside him. "We're fighting a machine." And the machine, Klaus realized, had already won. The train ride from Norfolk to Tennessee took 2 days. Not in cattle cars. In passenger coaches. Klaus sat by the window watching America scroll past. Farmland that stretched beyond sight. Towns with electric streetlights, grain silos taller than church steeples. Every few hours, the train stopped, and American Red Cross volunteers came through with sandwiches, coffee, and donuts. Donuts. For prisoners. On a train. Hans had stopped being surprised. "At this point," he said, biting into his third donut, "I wouldn't be shocked if they gave us our own automobiles." Camp Crossville sat in the Tennessee hills, surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. The only things that reminded Klaus this was actually a prison. Everything else felt like a hallucination. The barracks had electric lights, not oil lamps, not candles. Electric lights, bright, clean, instant. Flip a switch, and the room blazed to life, like something from a Fritz Lang film. The showers had hot water. Actually, hot. Pressurized. Klaus stood under the spray for 10 minutes the first night, watching steam rise, half convinced the Americans would burst in and demand payment. They didn't, because apparently hot showers for prisoners were just included. But the real shock, the thing that made Klaus question whether he died in Tunisia and this was some elaborate afterlife, was the PX. The post exchange sat at the center of camp, a wooden building with screened windows and a Coca-Cola sign out front. On his third day, Klaus earned his first work token, 80 cents for helping unload supply trucks, and joined the line of prisoners heading inside. The door opened. Klaus stopped walking. The shelves were full. Hershey bars, Milky Way, Baby Ruth, Snickers. Rows and rows of candy bars stacked like ammunition. Below them, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, Dr. Pepper, RC Cola, all sitting in coolers filled with ice. Cigarettes, Lucky Strike, Camel, Chesterfield, displayed in neat cartons. Fresh apples in wooden crates. Chewing gum, magazines, playing cards. A sign above the register listed prices. Candy bars, 5 CU, Coca-Cola, und cigarettes, 15 C ice cream. Cone duck, 5 cents. Klaus earned 80 cents per day. That meant he could buy 16 candy bars with a single day's wage. 16. In Germany, a single chocolate bar, if you could find one, cost a week's salary on the black market. First time? An American clerk asked, smiling. He was maybe 50, wearing a VFW cap. Probably a veteran from the last war. Klaus nodded, speechless. Take your time, the clerk said. We restock every Monday. We restock every Monday. Klaus bought a Coca-Cola and a Hershey bar. The clerk took his 15 cents, made change, and handed him a paper straw. Enjoy, he said, like Klaus was a customer instead of a prisoner. Outside, Klaus sat on a bench and unwrapped the chocolate. It snapped cleanly, fresh, not old or stale. The Coca-Cola fizzed when he opened it, cold enough to hurt his teeth. Hans walked up, holding 2 candy bars and a Pepsi. I bought extras, he said, for later. Then I realized, why bother? They'll have more on Monday. That was the moment it clicked for Klaus. Not scarcity, not rationing, not sacrifice. Abundance. Endless, casual, renewable abundance. The barbed wire wasn't keeping them in. It was keeping them from seeing too much, from understanding just how badly Germany had miscalculated everything. Klaus finished his Coca-Cola and looked at the half-empty bottle. In Germany, his mother would have saved the glass, washed it, reused it, treasured it. Here, he just threw it away. There were a dozen more in the cooler. And on Monday, there'd be 100 more. Klaus started keeping a mental list. Not because anyone asked him to, but because his brain, trained in logistics, in supply chains, in the math of war, couldn't stop calculating. Day 12. The mess hall puts out sugar bowls at every table. Real white sugar. No rationing. No measuring. Prisoners can take as much as they want for their coffee. By the end of breakfast, Klaus watches an American guard dump half a bowl into the trash because someone spilled water in it. Half a bowl. Maybe 200 grams. Thrown away. In Hamburg, his mother hoarded sugar crystals like diamonds. Day 18. A prisoner named Friedrich takes 3 bites of a Milky Way bar, decides he doesn't like nougat, and throws it away. Just tosses it in the trash bin. Klaus retrieves it later, not because he's hungry, but because he needs to understand. He sits on his bunk examining the discarded chocolate, the clean bite marks, the wrapper still mostly intact. 3 bites. Thrown away. Because the PX would have more tomorrow. You're being weird again, Hans says from the next bunk. We're living in a museum, Klaus replies. A museum of excess, and nobody here even notices. Day 23. The camp gets an electric ice cream maker. Industrial-sized. American-made. It sits in the mess hall and runs every Sunday, churning out gallon after gallon. Vanilla, chocolate, strawberry. Klaus does the math. The machine produces roughly 50 gallons per day. At 8 servings per gallon, that's 400 servings. For a camp of 800 prisoners, meaning every man could have ice cream twice, and there'd still be leftovers. The Americans run it anyway. On Sunday evening, Klaus watches a guard scrape melted ice cream, maybe 2 gallons worth, into the slop bucket. Didn't set fast enough, the guard explains, shrugging. We'll make fresh next week. 2 gallons. Wasted. written off. Klaus tries to imagine explaining this to his unit back in North Africa. The Americans threw away ice cream because it melted too much. They'd think he was shell-shocked. Day 31. Klaus volunteers for kitchen duty because he wants to see the supply deliveries. Every Monday, crates of Coca-Cola, 200 bottles, boxes of Hershey bars, 300 units, sacks of white sugar, 50 pounds, cartons of cigarettes, 500 packs, fresh fruit from local farms. Every single Monday. The American supply sergeant, a cheerful man from Iowa named Bob, doesn't even inventory it carefully. Just signs the clipboard and waves the truck through. Same as always? Bob asks. Same as always, the driver confirms. Same as always. Like feeding 800 enemy prisoners luxury goods was as routine as mail delivery. Klaus helps unload the Coca-Cola. Each crate weighs maybe 30 pounds. He stacks 20 crates, 600 bottles, and Bob doesn't even watch him count. There's no fear of theft. No paranoia about supplies, because there's always more. Day 45, Klaus sits in the mess hall drinking coffee, real coffee, the kind with actual coffee beans, and realizes he's stopped measuring his sugar. Just tips the bowl, pours, stirs, like an American. Hans notices. You've gone soft, he says, but he's smiling. He's doing it too. They've all gone soft. Because when abundance is guaranteed, scarcity thinking becomes obsolete. That night, Klaus writes a letter home. He's allowed one per month, heavily censored. He tries to explain what he's seeing, but every sentence sounds insane. Mother, they give us ice cream. The sugar bowls are never empty. Yesterday, someone threw away half a chocolate bar. He tears it up and starts over. Mother, I am well. The food is adequate. I think of you often. Some truths are too dangerous to write. Because if Berlin knew, if Germany really understood the scale of American production, the casual mathematics of their abundance, they'd realize the war had been over before it started. You can't beat a country that throws away ice cream. You can't defeat a nation that uses sugar as punctuation. Klaus finishes his coffee, dumps 4 spoonfuls of sugar in for a second cup, and watches the bowl refill itself at dinner. The arithmetic was simple. Germany had been solving for scarcity. America had been solving for Saturday. November 1943. Klaus had forgotten about Thanksgiving. The Americans hadn't. The notices went up on Tuesday. Thanksgiving dinner. Thursday, November 25th. All welcome. All welcome? Friedrich read aloud, squinting at the English. That includes us? Must be a translation error, someone muttered. It wasn't. Thursday morning, civilian cars started arriving at the camp gates. Not military vehicles. Civilian cars, Fords and Chevrolets, some shiny and new, others farm trucks with wooden side panels. American families from Crossville and the surrounding towns, carrying covered dishes and pies wrapped in cloth. Klaus watched from the barracks window as the guards waved them through. Women in dresses, old men in Sunday suits, children running ahead with baskets. They're bringing food, Hans said, stunned. They're bringing food to us. The mess hall had been decorated. Paper turkeys on the walls. Hand-drawn signs that said, Welcome and Happy Thanksgiving, in English and broken German. Long tables covered with checkered cloth. And the food. The food. Klaus had read about Thanksgiving in a propaganda leaflet once. American gluttony, they'd called it. A celebration of excess and waste. But seeing it was different. Turkey. Not one bird. Dozens. Roasted golden brown. Carved and steaming. Mashed potatoes in bowls the size of wash basins. Gravy boats that kept getting refilled. Stuffing with herbs Klaus couldn't name. Sweet potatoes topped with something brown and sweet. Green bean casserole. Cranberry sauce. Actual cranberries, tart and red. Corn. Rolls with butter. and pies: apple, pumpkin, pecan, cherry. A woman, maybe 60, gray hair pinned up, wearing an apron over her church dress, stood at the serving line with a smile that looked genuine. "How much would you like, son?" she asked Klaus in English. He stared at her. She'd just called him son. Him, a German soldier, an enemy. Klaus didn't know enough English to respond. She seemed to understand anyway. She loaded his plate until it couldn't hold any more, then handed him a napkin. "There's more if you're still hungry," she said, patting his hand. Klaus sat down and couldn't eat for a full minute. Across from him, Hans was crying again, quiet tears running down into his turkey and gravy. "My daughter is 8, Hans whispered in German. "She's eating turnips in Berlin. Turnips and black bread. And I'm eating this." He gestured at his plate, helpless, "with people who are supposed to hate me." Christmas was worse, or better. Klaus couldn't decide. The civilians came back, more of them this time. They brought gifts, wrapped presents, for prisoners of war. Klaus received a package with his name on it, written in careful English letters. Klaus Weber. Inside, a knitted scarf, a pack of playing cards, 2 Hershey bars, a small wooden cross, and a note in simple English. "Merry Christmas. God bless you. You are far from home, but you are not forgotten." The Morrison family, Crossville, Tennessee. Klaus had fired artillery at American positions in North Africa. He'd followed orders to shoot at men wearing the same uniform as the guards outside. He'd been taught to believe, that Americans were mongrels, a weak civilization doomed to collapse. And here they were, bringing him Christmas presents, the Morrison family, whoever they were. He tried the scarf on. It fit perfectly. Someone had measured, guessed, cared enough to knit something warm for an enemy soldier spending winter in Tennessee. Around him, 800 German prisoners were opening similar packages: scarves, gloves, candy, small Bibles, handwritten notes. Some men were laughing. Most were crying. Friedrich held up a pair of wool socks. "I don't understand," he said. "Why don't they hate us?" The chaplain, an American captain who spoke decent German, overheard. "Because it's Christmas," he said simply, "and you're somebody's son." That night, Klaus lay in his bunk wearing his new scarf, eating a Hershey bar, reading the note for the 10th time. "You are not forgotten." The cruelty he'd expected never came. The hierarchy he'd been promised, Aryan above all, had been reversed so quietly he'd barely noticed. Here, the enemy fed you turkey. Here, strangers knitted you scarves. Here, Christmas meant something bigger than flags and fatherlands. Klaus folded the note carefully and tucked it under his pillow. He'd keep it, even after the war, especially after the war, because someone needed to remember: the Morrison family of Crossville. Tennessee treated their enemies better than Germany treated its own. Spring 1944. The work details started taking prisoners outside the camp, not to mines or factories, at least not the kind Klaus expected. To farms. Klaus's detail got assigned to a cannery operation outside Crossville. 20 prisoners, 2 guards, a civilian foreman named Earl who chewed tobacco and spoke no German. The truck ride took 40 minutes through Tennessee countryside. Klaus watched through the slats: family farms with painted barns, tractors sitting idle in fields, children playing in front yards, churches with white steeples. No bomb craters, no rubble, no fear. America looked like the war was happening on a different planet. The cannery processed tomatoes, industrial scale, conveyor belts, steam machines, assembly lines of American women in hairnets operating equipment that would have been cutting edge in any German factory. Earl put the prisoners to work hauling crates. Simple labor. But Klaus couldn't stop watching the operation. The tomatoes came from local farms, truckload after truckload, bright red, perfectly ripe. The women sorted, washed, processed, canned. The machines stamped labels: Campbell's, Heinz, Del Monte, brands Klaus recognized from the Camp PX. At lunch, Earl brought out sandwiches for everyone. Guards, prisoners, civilian workers, same food. They ate together on the loading dock. One of the women, maybe 30, blonde hair under her hairnet, offered Klaus half her apple. "You speak English?" she asked. "Little," Klaus managed. "Where you from?" "Hamburg." She nodded thoughtfully. "My husband's in France." "Fighting." She said it matter-of-factly, not angry. "You got family back home?" "Mother, brother." "Hope they're safe," she said, and meant it. Then she went back to work, processing tomatoes that would feed American soldiers, maybe even soldiers fighting Klaus's former unit, and she just shared her apple with him. Week 2. Farm Detail. Harvesting Strawberries. The farmer, a man in his 60s with sun-weathered skin, explained his operation through a translator. 80 acres, crop rotation, irrigation systems, mechanized planting. "My grandfather had 40 acres, the farmer said. "Worked it with mules. Now I got tractors, electricity, refrigerated trucks. Can process 3 times the crops with half the labor." Klaus did the math. One American farm produced more than 3 German farms combined. The farmer noticed Klaus calculating. "You good with numbers?" Klaus nodded. "Figured. You boys always are." He pulled out a notebook, showed Klaus his ledgers. Yield per acre, profit margins, equipment costs. "Democracy's good for business," the farmer said. "When everybody eats, everybody buys. When everybody buys, everybody works. When everybody works, everybody eats. Circle keeps going." It was the simplest economic explanation Klaus had ever heard, and it destroyed everything he'd been taught about Lebensraum, living space, the idea that Germany needed to conquer territory to survive. America had space, more than it needed, and instead of conquering, they just farmed it, efficiently, abundantly, with machines and democracy and profit motives. Week 5. School Visit. The guards took them past Crossville Elementary during recess. Children playing on swings and slides, screaming with laughter. A teacher rang a bell and they lined up, orderly but not rigid, not military. Through the windows, Klaus saw classrooms, maps, books, desks, a library. "Every kid goes to school?" Hans asked the translator. "Through 8th grade, mandatory," the guard confirmed. "High school, too, for most." "Every kid," Hans repeated. "Farm kids? Poor kids?" "Every kid. It's free." Friedrich laughed bitterly. "In Germany, education depends on your father's job, your party connections. Here it depends on turning 6 years old," the guard said. That night, Klaus lay awake connecting dots. Educated workers, mechanized farms, industrial production, democratic participation, consumer markets. It wasn't complicated. Germany had built an empire on conquest and hierarchy. America had built an empire on production and inclusion. One system required enemies, the other just required customers. "You figure it out yet?" Hans asked from the darkness. "Figure what out?" "Why they're winning." Klaus was quiet for a long time. "They're not trying to be superior," he finally said. "They're trying to be efficient. And it turns out efficiency doesn't care about your bloodline." "Efficiency and ice cream," Hans added. "Efficiency and ice cream," Klaus agreed. Outside, somewhere in the Tennessee night, factories hummed. Farms grew. Schools taught. Canneries processed. And none of it required an enemy to function. That, Klaus realized, was the most terrifying weapon of all. Hamburg, 1952. Klaus Weber walked through the rebuilt city center with his son's hand in his. 7 years old, born after the war, after the rubble. after the hunger winter of 46 to 47 that had almost killed them all. The boy had never known the old Germany. Only this new one, rising from ash, fed by Marshall Plan dollars, rebuilding with American methods and American optimism. They passed construction sites where new buildings climbed skyward, department stores with window displays, cafes with outdoor seating, a few cars on the streets, not many yet, but more every month. And there, on the corner, a Coca-Cola sign. Bright red, unmistakable. Klaus stopped walking. "Papa?" his son asked. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Klaus said quietly. "Nothing's wrong." The shop was small, a converted storefront really, but through the window Klaus could see the cooler. Red and white. Coca-Cola in script letters. Just like Camp Crossville. Just like the PX. Just like the ship crossing the Atlantic 9 years ago. "Come on," Klaus said, pushing open the door. The bell chimed. The shopkeeper, a woman about Klaus's age, maybe a war widow, smiled from behind the counter. "What can I get you?" "2 Coca-Colas," Klaus said. "Cold, if you have them." "Of course cold." She pulled 2 bottles from the cooler, popped the caps with a practiced flick. 30 pfennigs each. Klaus paid. The price was higher than 5 cents, but not by much. Not unreachable. A worker's wage could buy it easily. That was the point, he realized. That had always been the point. Outside, Klaus handed his son the bottle. The boy examined it curiously. The distinctive shape, the bubbles rising through brown liquid. "What is it?" "Try it," Klaus said. His son took a cautious sip. His eyes widened. "It's sweet! And it tickles!" Klaus smiled. Really smiled. The kind that reached his eyes. "It's called Coca-Cola. It's from America." "America," the boy repeated, the word exotic and distant. "Where the soldiers came from?" "Yes." Klaus took a drink from his own bottle. The taste was exactly the same. Identical to Tennessee, to the ship, to that first impossible moment in 1943 when everything he believed began to crumble. 9 years, and it tasted exactly the same. That was American efficiency, American abundance, the democracy of flavor. They sat on a bench, watching Hamburg rebuild itself. His son drank his Coca-Cola in quick, excited gulps, the way children do, wasteful and joyful and unconcerned with scarcity. Klaus drank his slowly. "Papa?" his son asked. "Why are you crying?" "I'm not crying," Klaus lied, wiping his eyes. "The carbonation. It's strong." His son accepted this and went back to his drink. Klaus looked at the Coca-Cola sign across the street, then at the construction cranes, then at his son, this small person who would grow up in a Germany that looked west instead of east, that chose prosperity over ideology, that learned the lessons Klaus and 371,683 other men had learned the hard way. He leaned down and whispered, quiet enough that only his son could hear, "This is what freedom tastes like." The boy looked up, confused. "Coca-Cola?" "Yes," Klaus said, "and ice cream, and chocolate, and turkey on holidays, and sugar in your coffee without counting, and giving your enemy a sandwich because it's lunchtime and everyone needs to eat." His son was too young to understand, but he'd remember. Later, when he was older, when the stories came out, when Klaus finally told him about Camp Crossville and the Morrison family's Christmas scarf, still folded in Klaus's drawer, he'd remember this moment, the day his father bought him a Coca-Cola and cried. Klaus finished his bottle and stood. "Come on, your mother's waiting." They walked home through the rebuilding city, past American-style supermarkets and democratic institutions and schools where every child was taught, regardless of who their father was or what he'd done during the war. The bottle felt light in Klaus's hand. When they passed a trash bin, he tossed it in without ceremony. There would be more tomorrow. There would always be more. That was the victory, not in the battles or the bombs, but in the simple, devastating arithmetic of abundance. Germany had learned to count like America, and the taste of that lesson, cold, sweet, carbonated, would last forever.